The frozen wind screamed across Halverton Junction like the dying breath of a wounded starship. Thin air howling through the skeletal girders and along the open platforms. It wasn't just cold, it was the kind that hunted for seams in thermal. Suits slipped past seals and settled deep in bone marrow like a grudge. Garrett Dunham had walked these platforms for 7 years, hauling cargo between outer colonies and corporate mining hubs. He'd seen riots over ration water, hull breaches that turned men into red mist, and the quiet desperation of people who learned to smile while bleeding internally. He thought he understood the frontier's full vocabulary of cruelty. He was wrong. She was curled on a metal bench near platform 17, where the heating coils had failed 3 months ago, and nobody had bothered to fix them, because nobody important ever waited there. Her wings leathery, translucent membranes stretched. Over-delicate bones were wrapped around her body like a tattered blanket, the tips crusted with frost. Blue scales that should have shimmered like sapphires looked dull and grey. Her tail was coiled around her bare feet in a futile attempt to keep warmth from leaking out of her. Garrett stopped. His prosthetic arm whirred softly as he adjusted. The crate on his shoulder, servos protesting the cold just as much as his flesh and blood joints. She was small and despite the scales and wings, the small horns curving back from her temples, there was no mistaking it, whoever she was. She was young enough to still believe the universe might be kind. She lifted her head when he approached. Her eyes were amber, shot through with vertical pupils, and they widened as she tracked him. Predator's eyes, but exhausted, old, too old for a child. "Hey," Garrett said, voice rougher than he intended. 7 years on the frontier sanded down a man's social graces until there wasn't much left but edges. "You lost?" She shook her head, slow and stiff with cold, up close. He noticed the pattern of her scales, darker blue whorls around her cheeks and forehead, lighter patches along her jawline like fingerprints, unique, personal, unmistakably hers. That's when he saw the note. It was pinned to her clothing with a cargo spike, the kind traders used to mark containers for inspection. The paper was soggy with melted ice, but the words were blunt and legible. Daughter of some dragon. No bond. No claim. Cargo rejected. Something settled in Garrett's chest that had nothing to do with temperature. Cargo rejected, like she was a defective crate. Like she was nothing more than a failed delivery. He crouched, ignoring the protest from his left knee, the one that still ached from the incident on Callaway Station 6 years back. He held out his prosthetic hand, palm up, slow and non-threatening. "Who left you here?" he asked. She flinched away, wings rustling against the frozen bench. Her voice came out thin, but not broken. "The traders." "Traders?" Garrett repeated, tasting the word. Out here, trader could mean anything from honest freight to blood-soaked opportunist. "Why?" "They said I was trouble," she whispered. "That bounty hunters were asking questions." Garrett's jaw tightened. What kind of bounty hunters? Her eyes didn't leave his. "Syndicate." The word landed like a hammer. He'd heard the Behemoth Syndicate named in quiet conversations at border stations and encoded. Transmissions that slipped through security feeds like rot under a door. "They want Velari," she said, as if naming her people explained everything. "We're worth a lot to the right buyers. Velari, the dying species. Fewer than 10,000 left across the spiral arm, according to rumor. Living miracles." According to medical journals Garrett had skimmed in the long hours between jumps. Their wing tissue could regenerate, could encourage healing in other species. Their scales secreted compounds that cured diseases corporate pharma still couldn't synthesize, which meant, on the black market, they were worth more dead than alive and more alive than any person should ever be worth to someone else. "What's your name, kid?" Garrett asked gently. She hesitated, her tail loosened slightly from her feet, revealing small claws at the tips of her toes, pale violet, cracked from cold. "Selith," she said at last. "My mother called me Selith." Called, past tense. Garrett followed her glance toward the empty platform where transports should have been running, but hadn't for hours because of the storm. "She's gone," Selith said. "They all are. The traders found me in the wreckage on Via Prime. Said they were rescuers." Her wings tightened around her body. "They lied." Garrett stood slowly, mind racing through the implications. A Velari child, abandoned at a junction station during a winter storm. Syndicate hunters asking questions. Any sane person would walk away. Any smart person would pretend they'd never seen the note, never noticed the frost creeping along fragile wing membranes. Garrett Dunham had never been particularly sane, and being smart had earned him a prosthetic arm and a cargo hauler license, instead of the military pension he'd been promised. "All right," he said, voice firm because he needed it to be. "I'm going to pick you up now. You're going to let me, because if you stay here another hour, you'll freeze solid. Understand?" Selith stared at him, amber eyes searching his face for deception, cruelty, the hollow shape of another promise. Then, slowly, she nodded. He lifted her as gently as his mechanical arm would allow, cradling her close. She weighed almost nothing. Her scales were ice against his neck. Her trembling could have been cold or fear, or both. Her tail wrapped around his forearm like a question mark. "Where are you taking me?" she whispered. "My ship," Garrett said, already moving toward the maintenance corridors that would get them out of the storm. The Reluctant Mercy. Ugly name, uglier ship. But she's warm, and she's mine. Selith was silent for a moment. Then, so softly he almost missed it, she asked, "Why are you helping me?" Garrett pushed through an airlock into the junctions. Interior corridors where the heating was marginally less murderous. People went about their business Gersoni dock workers with elongated skulls and chrome-breathing rigs. Human miners headed for the recreational district, an elderly Morphe bureaucrat, shuffling through paperwork on a hovering tablet. No one looked twice at a cargo hauler carrying a winged child. Out here, you survived by not seeing what might get you killed, because someone should have helped you a long time ago, Garrett said at last, and because I know what it's like to be cargo that got rejected. The Reluctant Mercy was exactly as ugly as promised. A battered Corsair-class freighter, patched with mismatched hull plates, running lights flickering like a heartbeat with arrhythmia. But her seals held, her life support functioned. and her heating coils worked more than could be said for Platform 17. Garrett set Selith on the folding cot in the corner of the main cabin his bed, though he didn't say that, and dug into the emergency locker for thermal blankets, a compact heater, and a packet of nutritional gel that tasted like despair. "Eat," he said, wrapping her up. "It's awful, but it'll keep you alive." Selith took the packet with trembling fingers. As the warmth seeped into her, her claws began retracting into sheaths like a cat's, and her scales shifted slowly back toward blue. "You've had this before?" she asked, eyeing the gel. "Every day for 3 months after I lost my arm." Garrett tapped the prosthetic with his flesh hand. "Field rations aren't gourmet." "What happened?" she asked, gaze snagging on the mechanical joints. "Corporate mining dispute." He tried to keep it casual, but old bitterness rose anyway. "I was security on a transport convoy. The other side had better weapons. Company said limb replacement wasn't covered because I was technically off duty during the attack." He smiled without humor. "Turns out off-duty meant I was in the bathroom when shooting started." Selith studied his prosthetic with unsettling seriousness. "It's a good arm. It does the job," Garrett said, settling into the pilot's chair. He watched her eat with the fierce focus of someone who hadn't seen food in days. "Now, tell me about the Syndicate hunters. If they're tracking you, I need to know what I'm dealing with." Her wings rustled under the blankets. For a moment, Garrett thought she'd fold inward again, retreat into herself like she had on the bench. But then she took a breath, forked tongue flicking across her lips, and began. "The Velari Syndicate runs the black markets in the outer territories," she said. "Rare goods, extinct species, endangered biology." Her eyes met his. "Velari." Garrett listened as she explained tanks, sedation, harvesting wing tissue because it regenerated, peeling scales because they grew back, keeping people alive just to take them apart again and again. His jaw tightened until his teeth ached. "The traders who picked me up were freelancers," Selith said. "They planned to sell me, but something spooked them. Port inspections, new ID requirements. They decided I was too risky and left you with that." Garrett's gaze flicked to the note. Anger hummed under his skin. "They were going to kill me," she said flatly. "One of them, the woman with the metal teeth, said it was bad luck to kill a Velari. So they just left me." Selith stared down at her hands, scaled, clawed, webbed. "Maybe we shouldn't be real," she whispered. "Maybe it'd be easier." "Hey!" Garrett's voice snapped sharper than he intended. She flinched, and he forced himself gentler. "Don't say that. You're real. You're here. And you're not going anywhere except somewhere safe." "There is nowhere safe," Selith said, and the old weariness flashed through her eyes. "Then I'll make somewhere safe," Garrett said before he could stop himself. The words surprised him with their certainty. Once they were out, he realized he meant them in a way he hadn't meant anything in years. He didn't know when his life had narrowed to fuel calculations and cargo manifests and sleeping with one eye open. He hadn't known how empty that was until a child with frost on her wings made him feel it. He plotted a course to Cardi's Station Independent, technically outside Syndicate territory. Though outside meant little when criminals had long memories and longer reach, 3 hours later, the reluctant Mercy clawed her way off Halverton Junction, engines sputtering indignantly before settling into a rough, reliable burn. Selith sat in the co-pilot's chair wrapped in blankets. As stars blurred into the pale ribbon of hyperlight, "I've never been in hyperlight," she said softly. "The traders kept us in the hold. No windows." "Us?" Garrett asked. Her claws extended, digging into the armrest. "There were 3 of us at first. A boy named Selith and his mother. She was old, older than any Velari I'd seen. She didn't survive the first week." Garrett swallowed, words failing. "The boy stayed strong for a while," Selith continued, voice steady with the discipline of survival. "Then he stopped eating. He died believing no one was coming." "I'm sorry," Garrett said, and heard how inadequate it was even as he spoke it. "Don't be sorry," Selith snapped. "Tail lashing once. Be angry. Angry enough you don't let it happen again." Her voice softened after, smaller. "My mother used to say the galaxy is full of people who are sorry about what happens to us. Sorry doesn't keep us safe, only fighting back." "Your mother sounds brave," Garrett said. "She was furious," Selith whispered, "like a storm with wings." At Cardi's station, Garrett's last scraps of military past came back to him in the form of Commander Yolanda Costellon. Steel grey hair cut short, prosthetic legs whirring with every step, eyes sharp enough to skin a lie alive. "Dunham," she said, looking him up and down. "You look like something a rock crawler dragged out of a shaft." "Good to see you too, Commander," Garrett managed. Her gaze slid past him to Selith lingering in the shadow of the airlock. Wings tight, tail coiled around one leg. Yolanda's expression didn't soften, but something in it shifted recognition, calculation. A flicker of contempt for the world that created this situation. Syndicate traffickers. Yolanda said after Garrett explained, "Idiots. Keeping a Velari off the books. The species protocols alone." She gestured. "Come on. I've got a place where we can talk without 60 surveillance systems listening." Her place was a converted storage unit in the lower decks, cameras redirected, locks upgraded, warmth provided by a portable heater that hummed like a promise. The table was covered with data slates and printed documents. "It's worse than I thought," Yolanda said, spreading reports like a grim deck of cards. "The Syndicate has ramped up acquisitions for 18 months. New buyer. Wealthy. Paying. Premium for living specimens." Garrett's prosthetic hand clenched. "Children. Mostly." Yolanda said, voice careful and neutral in the way soldiers learned to speak about horrors. "A raid last month found 7 Velari in cryostasis. 6 under 12. Selith made a small sound, not quite a cry, but it tightened something inside Garrett like a wire pulled taut. "Keeping her hidden will be difficult," Yolanda continued. "Documents can fool automated systems, lazy inspectors, but the Syndicate has people who specialize in smelling cover stories." "What's your plan?" Garrett asked, already bracing. Yolanda's idea was audacious, illegal in at least 3 jurisdictions, and elegant in its ruthlessness. Forged identity chains, backdated custody records. Bureaucratic stamps so convincing they'd make a professional counterfeiter weep. She'll be a hybrid, Yolanda explained. Rare enough most won't know what to look for. Common enough she won't be automatically flagged. Wings are a developmental mutation. Plausible genetic variance. And me, legal guardian, Yolanda said. Not biological father. Guardian is harder to disprove. Selith spoke, quiet but steady. What if they don't believe it? Yolanda looked at her with something like respect. Then we move to step 2. You disappear. New names. New ship. So far off-grid even I won't know where you are. Garrett thought about everything he'd built meager as it was roots memorized. Dock managers who knew his name. Contracts that paid just enough to keep him flying. Then he thought about a child on a frozen bench with a note calling her. Nobody's. I wasn't attached to my reputation. He said, when do we start? For 3 weeks. They built a lie sturdy enough to hide a life inside. Selith learned to answer to Sarah Dunham, his ward, rehearsing her fabricated story until it fit like a second skin. Clothing was tailored to bind her wings into something that looked like deformity rather than flight. And slowly, in small moments, she began to trust him, laughing when he burned breakfast and filled the cabin with smoke, touching his prosthetic arm to get his attention, falling asleep in the co-pilot's chair without first memorizing every exit. Then the Syndicate broadcast hit Yolanda's monitored frequency on a Tuesday. Velari specimen V7742. Last known location, Halverton Junction. Status, escaped. Recovery priority, maximum. Bounty, 500. 0 credits. Yolanda read it once and swore creatively in 4 languages. They know, she said. You leave tonight. We're not ready. You're as ready as you'll ever be. Yolanda snapped, grabbing his flesh arm hard enough to hurt. 500,000 buys a lot of eyes. That night, the reluctant Mercy slipped out of Cardi's station like a guilty thought. Selith sat rigid in the co-pilot's chair. They're coming for me, she said. Trying and succeeding are different things, Garrett replied, eyes on the nav display. What if they find us? Garrett could have lied, wrapped her in soft promises until fear dulled. But she deserved truth more than comfort. If they find us, he said, slow and certain, I fight. I fight for you until there's nothing left of me to fight with. That doesn't sound like a plan. It's the only one I've got. He set his prosthetic hand gently on her shoulder. Metal cold, but she didn't flinch. That note said you were nobody's child. They were wrong. You're mine legally, officially, and every other way that matters. For 2 months, they ran, system to system, jump to jump, never stopping longer than necessary. Garrett learned to read warning signs, too many security checks, the wrong kind of questions. The way bounty hunters moved when pretending to be casual. Selith learned to staying out of sight, keeping her wings bound, answering questions about her condition with practiced ease. And she learned to fight. Garrett taught her during the long stretches between jumps when the void offered nothing but time and tension. Basic self-defense became evasion, misdirection, survival by desperate creativity. Once, after training, Selith stared at her extended claws with fear. I don't want to hurt anyone, she said. Good, Garrett answered, handing her water. Wanting to hurt people is how you become the kind who leaves kids to freeze on platforms. But not wanting doesn't mean you can't protect yourself. When you have to fight, you fight to win. I want to still be here, she said, voice fierce with new determination. Then we make sure you are, Garrett said. Both of us. The final confrontation came at Bellwether's Rest, a refueling depot on the edge of charted space. They needed fuel. The Mercy was running on fumes and stubbornness. Garrett was in the supply depot when he saw them, 3 figures moving with coordinated professionalism, 2 men, 1 woman, nondescript clothes, hunting posture. The woman smiled, and chrome flashed, metal teeth. Selith's words echoed. The woman with the metal teeth. They weren't Syndicate hunters. They were the traders who'd abandoned her on Halverton. And now business had brought them back. Garrett slipped behind a cargo container and activated the comm in his prosthetic. Selith, lock yourself in the Mercy. Don't open the door. For anyone but me. What's happening? Her voice was tight, frightened. The traders are here, he said. If they get past me, you take the ship and run. 1 jump. Yolanda's frequency is saved. Garrett, promise. Me. A beat of silence. Then, I promise. He cut the line and stepped out. The woman's smile widened. Well, she said. The cargo hauler playing hero. I'm not a hero, Garrett replied. I'm just a guy who doesn't like people who leave children to die. Please, she scoffed. We did her a favor. The Syndicate would have kept her alive. For decades. Farming her for parts. At least the cold would have been quick. Real humanitarian. I'm a businesswoman. She gestured, and the 2 men fanned out. 500,000 credits says you tell us where she is. We let you walk away with your good arm still attached. Garrett's prosthetic hand curled into a fist. Counter offer, you leave. You never come near her again. The woman laughed, sharp and ugly. 1 arm against 3. I don't like those odds. Neither do I, Garrett said, which is why I cheated. He triggered the emergency release he'd prepped with subtle frequency tweaks through his prosthetic. The container didn't explode. Station regulations frowned on that, but it burst open, vomiting hundreds of kilograms of compressed packaging foam that expanded violently on contact. With air, it swallowed the men first, pinning them in a white, suffocating mass. The woman stumbled back, clawing at foam plastered across her face. Garrett closed the distance in 3 strides and swung his prosthetic in a brutal arc. Metal met jaw. Her chrome teeth scattered across the deck like coins. She hit the floor hard. Garrett dropped a knee to her chest, prosthetic hand closing around her throat, not squeezing, just reminding her how easily it could. I'm not going to kill you, he said, calm despite adrenaline roaring in his veins. That'd be too easy. I'm calling station security and telling them you're trafficking an endangered species. The Velari Protection Accords went into effect 2 years ago. Minimum sentence is 20 in a rehabilitation colony. Her eyes widened. Fear finally punching through greed. You can't. The Syndicate will. The Syndicate doesn't operate in this sector, Garrett said. Not officially. And once you're in colonial custody, They can't touch you. He leaned closer, voice almost conversational. Enjoy rehab. I hear the food's terrible. He stood, activated an emergency beacon, and walked away as station security sirens began to wail. Selith was waiting at the airlock when he reached the reluctant Mercy. She'd ignored his instructions. Of course she had. She stood in the doorway gripping a cargo hook in small clawed hands, wings spread wide, amber eyes blazing with fire that reminded Garrett of the story of her mother furious as a storm with wings. I told you to lock the door, Garrett said. I heard the noise, Selith whispered, voice shaking. I thought they got you. They didn't. He crossed to her, crouching until they were eye level. I'm here. I'm fine. They're not taking you. Her grip broke. The cargo hook clattered to the deck. Then she threw herself at him, arms around his neck, holding on with surprising strength. Her wings wrapped around both of them, a leathery cocoon of warmth. Her tail coiled around his prosthetic arm like it belonged there. You came back, she whispered. You actually came back. I told you I would, Garrett said, hugging her gently, careful of fragile membranes. I promised. She pulled back just enough to look at him, eyes wet. People break promises all the time. I'm not people, Garrett said, and couldn't help the smile that cracked through exhaustion. I'm your dad, and dads don't break the important ones. Selith blinked, the word catching as if it had never been safe to say before. Dad. Yeah, kid. A softer smile found her mouth. I like that. An hour later, the reluctant Mercy lifted off Bellwether's Rest, engines singing their discordant, reliable song. Behind them, the traders were in custody, ahead in certain space, new names, hard miles, and the thin, stubborn possibility of peace. Selith sat in the co-pilot's chair, wings relaxed, tail draped over the armrest like she'd always belonged. There. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere new, Garrett said, fingers dancing over the nav console, double-checking calculations like prayer. He glanced at her at the deepening blue of her scales, the small horns that were growing a little each day, the amber eyes that had finally begun to lose their haunted edge. Somewhere safe, he said. Somewhere we can be a family without looking over our shoulders. Is there really a place like that? Selith asked, quiet hope threading through caution. We'll find one, Garrett said. He reached over with his prosthetic hand. Selith took it without hesitation, her small clawed fingers curling around metal like it was the most natural thing in the galaxy. And if we can't find one, Garrett added, we'll build one. Stars blurred as the reluctant Mercy slipped into hyperlight, carrying them away from everything that had tried to reduce them to cargo and contracts and expendable parts. In the co-pilot's chair, Selith finally closed her eyes. Breathing slowing into the steady rhythm of real sleep, Garrett watched her for a moment, something warm and unfamiliar unfurling in his chest. Then he turned back to the navigation display and guided them toward a future that, for the first time in 7 years, felt like it might actually be worth flying toward. The note had called her nobody's child. Cargo rejected, daughter of some dragon. The note was wrong. She was his, and he was hers, and that was the only thing that mattered.